At this time, I want to introduce our closing and final keynote speaker. So Lance Rougeux started his career as a teacher at Julia de Burgos Bilingual Middle School in the School District of Philadelphia. He is a co-founder of the Purple Feet Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on helping underserved students to think about their future. Prior to joining Discovery Education, Lance was an executive policy specialist at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Lance currently serves as Vice President of Learning Communities and Innovation. He holds master's degrees in educational leadership and technology in education from Villanova University and Harvard University, respectively. Lance resides in Pennsylvania, even though most of his cousins and fellow Steelers fans have moved to North Carolina. Lance?
Thank you very much. Any other Steelers fans here that have transplanted? I wish I had prizes. There we go. So thank you guys for having me. My role at Discovery Education, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Discovery Education, but it's part of the larger Discovery Channel, Discovery Communications, Animal Planet, even TLC, which we don't talk about too much in education circles. But at Discovery Education, our main job is we create digital content in the form of digital textbooks, supplemental services that we partner with schools and districts and even states to implement and help districts through this digital transition. My role is pretty simple, and for the past decade, this is what I've done at Discovery is I support our overall professional learning community. So connecting teachers to each other, because we do believe that connecting teachers to their most valuable resource is connecting them to each other. So we do a lot of work with principals as well and superintendents, but in-person events, virtual events. My main job, though, is I'm in charge of our learning community strategy, right? And as I was going through the day, there were so many connections and just things I was reflecting on in terms of the issues and topics that we were discussing related to the idea of professional learning networks. And it's really interesting to me, for the past decade, I've made a living and been really passionate about working with teachers and overseeing a pretty large global professional learning community. But when I started teaching, the second year of teaching, I put a doorbell on my classroom, right? Because I wanted no one to come in, right? And you think about so I'm in charge of a professional learning community of literally 3 million teachers globally, the whole spirit of collaboration and sharing and networking. And my second year of teaching, I wanted absolutely no one to come in, to the point where after school one day, they send you a FOSS kit that has a doorbell for your electricity unit, and you have 33 kids. I was teaching in Philly, you got 33 kids. What am I going to do with one doorbell? So after school, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to have a couple of the kids who are in detention put this together, put it on my door, and then we came up with a secret ring. And it was buzz, pause, buzz, buzz, pause, buzz. And unless you knew that ring, you couldn't get in, including the assistant principal, who on multiple occasions would call me down and discipline me for not answering the door. The reason I did this rambling story about a doorbell, is I was petrified. If something was going really well, which was sort of a miracle, in my first year or two of teaching, if something was going well, please don't interrupt it. I got this 10 minutes of a math lesson that they're sitting down and they're paying attention to me, and I think this is good. And if it wasn't, I certainly didn't want anybody coming in, right? Now that shifted for me when my third year teaching. I went to Rhode Island with a couple other colleagues, veteran colleagues, and we went to the Annenberg Institutes, the Critical Friends. Anybody familiar with the research? All right. The whole idea here is that we go as a team from a school, and we meet other teachers from other places who are doing amazing things, and you share your work. And it was the most humbling but life-changing, career-changing experience, because you had to take a sample of work, and the sample of work that I took was this lousy 10-question multiple-choice science quiz. And I remember going up and other teachers, veterans of 20 years, are sharing these project-based learning, and I was literally wanted to go in the corner and hide, because I have this lousy 10-question quiz, which I wasn't even sure why I was administering it. I guess I was just that was what I teach the kids something, I ask them a 10-question quiz, and we move on. And it was so amazing, because the reflection and the dialogue from these veteran teachers who said, well, maybe it's good, maybe it's not so good, but let's take a step back, and what are you trying to assess? It was the first time I had a real conversation about what I was doing in my classroom. So from closing my door to now this kind of revelation of this is really what a profession is that we can actually sit and talk and learn from each other. And I'm not expected in my first day to know the same things that you know after 20 years of teaching and amazing experiences. So we came back from Annenberg and we were challenged because anytime you leave a school, you have to come back. Like if you go to a conference, you have to come back and justify why you were sent and the money that was spent. So you have to present to the school at a faculty meeting. So our strategic plan for what we were going to do with the Critical Friends learning that we got to spend 2 days outside of school was we formed the Friday Night Pedagogical Society. And it was my first professional learning network. So every Friday we would get together for wings and beer and we would discuss the issues of the day. And it grew and it grew, and it was, an in-person, face-to-face network, but despite the name and the wings, it actually was this reflective practice that really led me ultimately to kind of the passion of my work now. So just a couple days ago, we had a researcher from UMass Amherst who did a little study on our community, and she sent me a note and said, hey, I finally got this published, and this is ultimately our goal. My goal with our network at Discovery, with our community, is that we don't want teachers to feel isolated or alone. We want them to feel supported, and that's new teachers, that's veteran teachers, and everybody in between. But at the end of the day, and that's the kind of the focus of today, is that we're talking about teacher recruitment and retention and getting and acquiring and retaining talent. And I personally don't want teachers to feel alone, but at the end of the day, this is not really what we're talking about. Like, this is a means to an end. The end here is, if we do this at Discovery, if we do this collectively as a state, as a country, and we support teachers and keep them and give them a ladder and a career pathway, the end result is what we want for students, right? So this is, if I do this, I feel like I'm actually making an impact on kids in my community. So this is the real question for the day. What do you want learning to look like for students in North Carolina? All right, so I'm going to show you, on the tables here, there are these things that look like a little Rorschach test, little piece of paper. Just like pass them down to your left or right. Take one for every 2 people because you can share. I'm going to show you 4 pictures, and I'm not checking my text messages. I'm opening up an app here. All right, I'm going to show you 4 pictures, and you have to pick one that most exemplifies what you want learning to look like for your kids, for kids in North Carolina, for students in general. All right? Now the challenge is you can only pick one, and I'm not going to give you any context. Now, does anybody know what you're holding there? Have you ever heard of these? All right, the teachers know, right? They're plickers. Okay, so the way this works is I'm going to give you A, B, C, D choices, and then whichever one you're holding up on your paper, whichever one's at the top is going to be your response, and I'll just scan my phone here. But let me show you the pictures, all right? You can only pick one. So there's A. There's B. C. And D. All right, so if you're sharing a plicker, one of these really sophisticated paper clickers, talk to your neighbor, pick one, A, B, C, or D. I'll put them up here so you can see. Once you have it, just hold it up, and what I'm going to do is just scan my phone. Get a little bit out of the light here. Perfect. Thank you. I got a lot of light, so I might just come a little closer, but they're scanning in. Much better. Okay. How many of you are now going to go back? The teachers have already used Plickr, so they've heard of it. How many of you are going to now go back and share this with somebody that, right? This, by the way, is one of those super innovative technologies that's affordable because it's free, and it's powerful because, okay, I think I got mostly everyone, which is so fascinating here. All right, It's one of those great technologies because it's free and you can this is a quick formative assessment. The kids get into it. It's an engagement strategy, but literally I just wasted like 3 minutes because I could have just had you raise your hands. But anyhow. All right, so it's an interesting mix. I mean, it's literally like a pretty even split between A, B, and D, but very few C's. So the beauty of this is like there's anonymity. Kids can respond and then they don't have to call them out. But just since we're all adults here, I would just love to hear somebody tell me why you picked or your group picked A. Yes?
Sorry, I thought you were going to go with C. I was too eager. That's my bad.
Well, let's do C then. Yeah, let's do C.
I picked C. Well, my crew, that there were 3 of us, picked C because 3D printing is awesome. And I'm biased because I do a project where we 3D print spacecraft. So I, kind of already have a personal draw to that. But to me, as a teacher, 3D printing shows what the future holds for our kids, and there are so many capabilities that they have to use that, and not just a way to create this cool little 3D model of something, but ways that it can actually help people.
Interesting. So it's not just because of the technology piece, it's the possibilities that it shows, the real world connections. I presented this recently to a group of superintendents, and I'll just share this real quick. And a lot of them said C. Like the majority, it was the opposite here. This was the one that had the least. And so I asked the same thing. I'm like, well, why did you say C? So one of the superintendents said, because I like coffee. And everybody did this. Thought it was a Keurig. All right, so the district obviously didn't have any 3D printers. So who said A? Thank you so much for sharing C. Anybody that said A, just want to tell us just briefly why?
Because it was outdoor learning and it was collaborative learning, and the students looked really engaged and hands-on in something like biology-ish. But I like that piece of it, that it was outdoor and it was collaborative.
Outdoor, collaborative, right? Excellent. Thank you. How about B? Way in the back there.
I picked B mostly because I couldn't pick all of them. I think because it was very tactile and hands-on.
Okay. Very hands-on, very tactical. They're actually, all of these pictures are from a summer camp that my wife and I run. So they are actually, it's culinary arts class, right? And they're working together. So it's, again, that collaborative teamwork piece. All right, how about D? Somebody that said D, yes.
I feel like D had it all. It had kids working together, which indicated community. It looked like it had technology involved and nurturing or application of a concept that maybe they had learned. And it seemed like they had a leader there maybe helping them along.
Perfect. So where they're at actually is one of these advanced nursing labs for juniors and seniors. So they literally, the technology involved is that baby's like an $80,000 piece of equipment because they can program that baby to have a fever, to cry. And yeah, and you're right. They had one of the nursing professors there explaining, what they do. And then ultimately that classroom, we take the kids there because it's kind of like this, they're used to sitting in rows in a traditional school. But this classroom it's a clinical lab where you're going in and we're simulating what's going to happen when you're in the real world, right? So interesting thing about when we say, what do you want your vision of learning to look like for kids? The words that come out of our mouths are not necessarily the words sometimes that we direct our energy to. Because here we talk about collaboration and we talk about real world experiences, empathy comes up, creativity, solving problems, right? And how does that translate? And it's a daunting thing for veteran teachers, especially new teachers, right? But that's really the exciting part of it. When we talk about flipping the narrative, it is, most teachers come in for, because it's a calling, it's a vocation. I mean, I started as a middle school teacher. I mean, that was what enticed me to it. I mean, I like working with kids, but I wanted to make a difference. And, how do we flip that narrative ultimately to tell that story of, this is what we want learning to look like. These are the experiences that you're going to be able to give kids because you're preparing them for something greater. But it's difficult, right? And when I talk about our work at Discovery with the professional learning communities, and really literally our job is just to connect teachers and educators together and support them and let the magic happen. to some extent, we're like principals or superintendents. I mean, that's how I look at my team. Like, we just try and facilitate that. And the end result, I think, sometimes is pretty fascinating. We went into a classroom, one of our science textbook classrooms, middle school, it's grade 6, and we went in and we did a virtual reality 360-degree video. So literally, this is one of those things you can put the Google Cardboard on and you feel like you're going to fall down. But I just captured some of the 360 video and just love to hear what you see. Anything stand out? What do you notice?
They're not all doing the same thing.
Not all doing the same thing,
Group tables, not classroom.
right? Grouped in tables, right? What else?
There's not 40 students.
There's not 40 students. I think there are 25.
They're all engaged.
They're all engaged.
Students are helping each other.
Students are helping each other.
Got a wide range of materials that they're using for whatever lab's going on.
Yeah, so there's hands-on stuff. The kids in the back, it's hard to see this far away, but like the kids in the back are on laptops, the kids in the front are sharing the smart board. The kids on this side of the room or this side of the room actually have tablets that they're doing a kind of vocabulary station, right? But the things that you see, so all those things that you listed, like my first year, if I could have done one of those things, or second year, if I could have done one of those things, like I would have felt really good. I might even have let the door open for 5 minutes, right? But this is somebody who has been teaching for 25 years, right? It's an active member of our community. And when we filmed this, the other thing is most teachers don't have that people point out thank you guys for being so polite. They're like, well, I see you have 2 cameramen in there. It's like, thank you. We had to record it somehow, right? But the kids literally after 5 minutes of doing this, because they filmed for like 3 hours, like they just disappeared. Like, this is really what this classroom looks like. The classroom management, the relationship, I mean, that's the stuff that you don't hear without the sound and the background of the teacher, is like beyond just understanding the content and the pedagogy, it's the relationship. You get close and you look around the room, you see pictures of the kids up on the back wall. There's so many things to look at here, and it's so complex, and it is truly like artistic. Somebody that can do this, and there are many people, right? But not everyone, right? So how do we get to this point? And I just thought, as we wrap up today, all the things that we've been talking about, every single session, I'm going to repeat pretty much everything that all of our other speakers in the breakouts really quickly, because how do we it's a system that ultimately helped this teacher get to this point, right? So field experience, we've talked about it in almost every, either directly or indirectly. The idea of field experience for pre-service teachers, but field experience /PD, whatever you want to call it, professional learning, professional development, field experience, ongoing field experience. Like, this is 25 years of going to workshops and summer institutes and really honing her craft, right? And I think one of the interesting things at Discovery, outside of just digital content, we're as much a professional development business now. And I just asked our PD team this just because I was curious. The interesting shift that we're seeing, and it came up again today, like the role of mentoring and the impact and importance of coaching. We're going to do 7,000 days of in-person PD with districts around the country. Almost half of them at this point are instructional coaching. Like, we sell digital products. Our PD used to be like, come in and I'll show you how to log in and set up your password and use the textbook. This is such an interesting shift. Like, districts are they're begging for it because we know it works. Like, wouldn't you want that teacher to come in and work with you, with your teachers, give advice, right? So an interesting shift. So field experience is one piece of that, and that's one of the things we try and do with our learning communities, right? Virtually, in person, we do hundreds of events. The other kind of piece that I pulled out of this, when we look at that teacher and getting there, because ultimately that teacher helps you guys get where you want for kids. Because we want kids to collaborate, we want kids to be hands-on. That kind of classroom setting, and with a teacher like that, helps us get there. All right? So field experience or professional development. The other is choice. I think this is an interesting one when we talk about professional development. The extension of that is choice, and treating teachers. We call it professional development, but it's really just development. Because if you're truly a professional, you're not just told where you're supposed to go and what your professional development is supposed to be. So it's giving choice in that, right? And everybody likes choice, because not everybody, it's not a one-size-fits-all. People respond to certain things more excitedly than others. Case in point.
What do you want me to look for? Vigor. What is this?
There's a clue in your bag. Look in your bag, Gavin.
I already
No.
have a clue in my bag.
What is it?
Monster figure. Disney World. Ah! I'm going to Gavin, we're going to Disney World. I want to.
What?
Disney World. Let me find it.
All right. So everybody wants choice, right? By the way, like, you could play that video in the context of any presentation and people will laugh. Like, you could, like, if you have to deliver bad news at like a board meeting about budgets, just play that and make some sort of weird loose connection, right? But when I translate, I mean, I was looking at all these connections between the work we do at Discovery with our learning communities, which is professional development, right? And it's teachers that kind of opt into it. But it's the same types of parallel supports and some of the same lessons. So when we talk about choice, if you're in a professional learning community and you give choice, like, choice leads to ownership. So when we have folks raise their hand and say, I want to try this and that, you know, then they build programs and for others. It's also valuing formal and informal, which I think we've seen a huge shift in that with, you know, ed camps and all sorts of different, you know, various formats in terms of it's not just our 3-hour half day on Monday staff meeting, right? There's also the idea that, you know, for that teacher to get to that point where she can facilitate an environment like that, there's a professional learning network that also bleeds over into, I think the most powerful ones bleed over into where you have relationships and a professional learning network becomes personal, right? So these are just some of the lessons we learned. If you look back to the Friday Night Pedagogical Society, like, it was that blend of personal and professional that really made it work, because there's that level of trust, right? The other is support. We provide a ton of support to our community members. I think that parallels to what a principal or building level administrator, like support in terms of time and resources in particular, right? You need the resources to help differentiate your instruction. You need time to sit and work with your colleagues and co-plan, all right? But furthermore, in addition to that support, and this is one that I think is just so important. We actually did a little bit of research on this at the end of last year. Every year we do a community health index, and we ask the same questions, and then we have kind of a spin-off, and it's to inform the work that we do, like the supports that we provide, right? One of the interesting things was this idea of validation. Probably 5-6 times a month we'll do virtual field trips for free, and in November we'll go up to Churchill, and we'll do these live broadcasts from the tundra. Literally, like, scientist on the tundra in a buggy with one of us, and there are bears, polar bears, right outside. Like, who wouldn't want to bring your kids to that virtually, right? Everybody. But when I talk to teachers a lot of the time, the interesting thing is, like, yeah, I know I want to do that, but it's at 1 o'clock Eastern, it's math class. Like, I just have to check with my principal, because there's this fear of, you know, and it's a real fear, I'm not dismissing it, but it's like that validation of, like, if I'm walking in and you're just looking at polar bears on a virtual field trip and you're supposed to be on page 20 working on your math lesson. So that validation piece is so critical, right? And the research that we did, I mean, this is, without going into the details of it, we did a community survey. We said if you're engaged in the community, it means you do these things. Like, you share with others, you create resources, etc., right? And the folks who had a deeper or higher level of community engagement, right, which you could then extend, like people who are really engaged in the community that are learning, or maybe more effective teachers. Like, you could take all sorts of jumps, but at the end of the day, the folks who had this higher level of engagement, it was statistically more significant for each of those subscales if their principal validated it. To the point where it was just literally like, I know you're doing this stuff, great work. It doesn't have to be anything extensive, but it was just that validation. And it seems kind of natural, like, your boss says it's a good thing to do, you're probably going to do it and do it better and more of it, right? But it's neat to see the research play out. The other piece in terms of support, and we see this again and again, professional learning communities translates to K-12 in a single school. And it came up a couple times today. Like just the simple recognition and reward, and we don't do that enough. Like the narrative's this, the narrative that sells is this ugly, nasty, things are falling, sky's falling, teachers suck, and it's just not true, right? So that's one of the things in terms, that's what I wrote on my piece of paper, in terms of like next steps, one of the things, like we have to help flip that narrative. And it doesn't take much, right? One of my favorite things at Discovery that we do is Teacher Appreciation Week. Every day, we blow this out. We work with partners and we give members of our community something every single day, a message along with some sort of treat. And the messages we get back are so, like they're just so uplifting, but they're also really depressing. So it's like, you're the only person, like a company. I know I work for a company, right? I'm not like, dear Lance, I've been part of the community for so long, blah, 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 and I just love Teacher Appreciation Week because you guys are the only folks that give me anything. I remember 10 years ago, I got a pencil from my principal, and it's like, oh, we're just missing the boat here, right? Because this social recognition and social reward goes so far, all right? And kind of the last piece that we've talked about is this idea of leadership opportunities, right? So within our community, these parallels, and this is one of those big ones, the whole career ladder, ladders and lattice. The lattice I learned about today in terms of a term, right? But even within our community, there's all these different ways you can participate. When I was teaching, this is what I thought, right? That's what I thought. It wasn't necessarily true, but that was my perception. So what did I do? I went and got a master's degree in educational leadership and then realized, well, maybe I didn't want to do that and found these other opportunities, right? Because there are other opportunities. And that one breakout that we had today discussing all these different pathways. And I think that's really exciting about this work. Right? So we know when we support teachers and we do these things, and we're not the be-all and end-all, that teacher in the beginning who's been teaching for 25 years, it's not just because of our Discovery community, but we've played a small role in supporting that. But when we can do those things and provide that support and just recognize and reward, we get great results, and we see those same great results translate into schools and ultimately back to students, because that's the real question. So as you move the work forward, I think this is the main thing to keep in mind, is that the narrative should be about this. Just like schools, we work with a lot of schools that are doing the digital transition, and they'll say, I have an iPad initiative. The second you say you have an iPad initiative, you've just lost, right? Because your initiative is not about iPads, your initiative is about kids. So when we say we have a teacher incentive or a teacher compensation initiative, you've lost. Right? Focus in on what you're trying to accomplish, because then people can't flip the narrative and the script on you. So thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.